Welcome to the first event of our second year. Really successful first year. We had 2 online events and we had our in-person event in Manchester. It was lovely to meet a load of other sociology teachers there. We've got some more events coming up this year, which I will talk about a little bit later. So this evening we've got our keynote speaker, which is Ben from All Sociology. So I'll pass over to him in a minute. But before that, I just want to say, can you make sure that you tweet through the evening? I want to do a little shout out to Sunny, who it's taken him 3 hours to get home. And so, yeah, I feel for him, but he will be there on the Twitter feed in a little while. So, retweet and tweet throughout the event. This obviously is available on YouTube at the moment, but will be available afterwards as well. Resources will be available on the TES, so any PowerPoint presentations or whatever, that'll be tomorrow. I'd like to say thanks to the team for organising, particularly Kim, who does all the work really. She's fab. So I'd like to introduce Ben Hewitson first of all. All Sociology is a fab resource. I know that it's got me out some sticky situations. I've set videos for cover for my GCSE students. So Ben is going to talk to us about preparing sociology students for exams. So I'd like to hand over to you, Ben.
Thanks very much, Kerry. Hello, everybody. Those of you who don't know me, my name's Ben. I am a teacher in the east of England, and I also run All Sociology, which is a resource that is full of podcasts, videos, and other bits and pieces that might help your sociology students throughout their exams. So what I'm going to do tonight is just go through some ways in which I've kind of found have helped me go through helping students prepare for their exams. So it's not a case of teaching grandma to suck eggs, although I'm sure I will do that as we go through. But what I want to kind of get across is like 5 things that have just helped me prepare my students for sociology exams, and that might also help you, or at least might give you a bit of food for thought. So what I'm going to do is hopefully go through these 5 different things. It's going to be mainly sort of thinking in my head about GCSE sociology students, but it's certainly applicable to A-level as well. And my kind of view really is the picture we've got here is this lad who's looking very stressed out with exams. I'm sure a lot of you are probably seeing the start of this with your students as well at the moment. And I'm certainly seeing this in my sociology students, and I'm also a year 11 form tutor. So I know what it's like for some students at the moment, particularly if they've got mocks coming up or have just done mocks and are also preparing for those actual exams in the future. So without further ado, let's have a think about what we can start to do. So my first kind of tip really, and I hope this is coming through well on the feed, is to start revision early. Now it sounds ridiculous to say this, but I would always say to start what I do is start my revision sessions before Christmas. So I get students to get in the habit of coming to extracurricular sessions, for instance, coming to a before school session for those who want to, or sometimes after school. And it's all about starting small, starting it very easy and starting to grow the knowledge over time. So rather than starting big and going in for all guns blazing, start small, make it really achievable for your students, give them lots of rewards as well. Now, at the start, when you start revision, I always find that the students who come along at the start are often not really sure where they should start in terms of their actual revision. So at the start, you've got to kind of guide them to what to do. But as you go through, if you're doing regular sessions and things like that, they will then start to guide you. And one of the ways in which I get students to sort of tell me what they want me to focus on, and sort of what we should focus on, should I say, is through revision, is using things like topic checklists, or my school, I think, called them personal learning checklists, PLC, something like that. And all it is effectively, it's the specification that's just been chopped up into a few different bits. So this one here is just a small example of the EDUCAS GCSE research methods course. So what I do, rather than just having it as a couple of bullet points, I actually split up the things they need to know, allow themselves to then self-assess their knowledge. You can then take those in, so you print them out, give them out to kids, take them in, and then from a very quick view at just what they don't seem to know very well rather than what they do know well, that will get you an idea as to the sort of kind of priorities of topic areas and things to focus on within those topics. So something to consider if you're thinking about where do I start with revision. But I'm very conscious that I've already spoken quite a lot about the content and revising content, really important not to forget the skills. One of the things that I've found certainly over the last few years, especially with the sort of post-COVID generation coming through the lockdown learnings and all of that, is that a lot of students know the content quite well, but it's actually a case of putting that content into practice to give them something that they can use for a question, whether that be an essay or perhaps a shorter mark question. So going through your standards, assessment objective 1, knowledge and understanding, and 2, application of knowledge, 3, analysis and evaluation, hitting those kind of skills, really important. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how you can do that in a moment. Now, one of the things that my school particularly is very hot on is using retrieval practice. And retrieval practice is all basically about going back over stuff you've done before and making sure that you can recall that knowledge and you can take things a little bit further. So one of the ways I do this, it's probably something that everybody does, but I use starter activities to do my retrieval practice. Again, thinking about making it very attainable and very easy at the start and building up as you go through that first sort of 5-10 minutes of the lesson. So one of the things I like to do is, instead of getting students to write stuff down, I'll just bung some questions on the board, or I'll put some sort of thought starters or thought experiments on the board. And there'll be questions like, what factors affect the declining rate of marriage, or what factors affect underachievement at school, those kind of things. Now, what I've often found is that, again, students are quite easy to come up with certain concepts or ideas. So, this or that, or policies, or whatever it might be. But I've found that what's a useful thing is, rather than moving on, is to then sort of move beyond that initial, what I call and what Daniel Kahneman calls sort of system 1 thinking. And system 1 thinking is very initial, top of mind, instant kind of reactions. So when you ask students, for instance, outline an explanation for why divorce has increased over in the last 50 years, they'll talk maybe about a law, or they might say the Divorce Reform Act. Here, what you need to do is then sort of bounce the idea around. Okay, so who can tell me a little bit more about that, and try and draw out this slower, more conscious thought about what was the Divorce Reform Act? What did it do? In what way did it affect divorce rates, for instance? And so when I'm doing retrieval practice, I don't worry too much about covering lots of ground. It's more about actually going from that initial top of mind thought to a more kind of what Kahneman calls a system 2 thinking. So a more kind of considered thought about maybe how you might apply that in an essay. I think as well, with retrieval practice, always good to sort of start to develop those synoptic links, or at least help students make those synoptic links. So there's loads of things in sociology that we cover, whether it be at GCSE or A level, that kind of cut across different units. So the ones that sort of spring to mind are things like labeling, or cultural deprivation, material deprivation, those kind of things. And to start making, when that issue, whether it's cultural deprivation or labeling or whatever, gets raised, to say, okay, let's just take this for a moment. How else can we talk about this, and what other topics might we apply this? Which sociologist talks about this, and those kind of things. So to take those little gems when you're doing your retrieval practice and see if you can build any links between them. And something I'm going to talk about now as well is trying to keep retrieval very fresh and not making it a chore for the students, because often some students, I found, certainly feel like, why are we doing this? We've done this already. So one of the things you can do, which I'm going to mention now, is to consider gamification or game-based learning as a way of doing retrieval practice. So effectively what I'm talking about here is using games and game-based principles. So that might be playing a game as a starter activity, or using kind of a bit of a sense of competition. If you've got an even mixed boys versus girls, or people wearing jumpers versus people not wearing jumpers, or whatever it might be, is a good way to do this. And it really encourages engagement with those smaller activities. So I've actually done some research on this. My school encouraged us to take up a research project, and most recently I've looked into how the gamification of learning can affect student engagement in lessons. And I found that it really works well for both the lower ability and the higher ability as well. So we'll probably all be familiar with things like Kahoot, which is wonderful and great. So it's an online quiz format. It's very easy to set up, and I'm sure many of you have played it. 100% very easy to do your own. So instead of using other people's, do have a go at doing your own. Very easy to do. Something you may not have heard of is Gimkit, and Gimkit is a similar concept to Kahoot, but it's way more competitive, and it's, to be honest, a lot more fun. And the concept of it is, it's answering questions again, but students get given an allowance of money, and they can use that money to buy things like power-ups, or they can make double the amount of money they get for questions, and it's all each question is based on an amount of money, and the aim of the game is to grow the amount of money as you go through. So it follows a very sort of similar convention to video games or computer games that students play at home and are quite used to that kind of idea. So definitely one worth checking out if you've got IT facilities or your school aren't too bothered about students using mobile phones in lessons. Those are two great ones for that. If your school is a bit like mine and we've got a zero mobile phone policy, you get the laptops out for Kahoot and Gimkit. But when you don't have that privilege, I do little games here and there. So one of the games I love playing is just called the Types of Game. And it's a real simple activity, and all you have to do basically is put a topic up on the board, and that topic might be something, I don't know, for instance, it might be sociologist names or key terms in sociology. And then you get all the students to stand up, and then you ask them one by one to name me something that relates to that thing. So name me a name of a sociologist, name me a sociological concept, and you go around each student one by one, and basically if they can't do it or they hesitate, they have to sit down. If they continue and they get it correct, they manage to stay in the game, and you'll give a prize to the winner or those kind of things. And again, it's just a nice way to do those retrieval type activities when you're trying to go back to topics that you may have covered, you know, in the autumn term of year 10 with your year 11 group, or in the case of year 12 at the autumn with year 12 and you're in year 13. So it's a nice way to do that if you've got those type of students who are happy to play those sorts of games. Now, the last thing I wanted to mention was getting inspiration from TV game shows. So there's ways you can make up your own games, but you don't have to come up with the concept and the rules and so on and so forth. You just steal them from what's on TV. So some of the great ones that I kind of steal from are Only Connect. So Only Connect walls are a really good, fun way to make a game out of revision. What some of the other ones I use, so Richard Osman's House of Games is also very good. If you go onto Wikipedia and type in Richard Osman's House of Games, there comes up with a list of the games that they play and the kind of the basic rules of them. So all you have to do is apply those to sociology. Countdown, anything you like, really. In fact, I recently got given a Deal or No Deal, if you remember that one from about 10 years ago. I got a Deal or No Deal game that was sent to me by somebody, so I'm yet to play that. But again, nice ways to keep engagement and really help the lower ability, but also challenge the most able. And the last thing I'm just going to mention on gamification is, as you may be able to see at the bottom of the screen there, I've got some icons coming up, which are kind of symbols and icons that are associated with different computer games. So we've got Super Mario on the left-hand side, and then Rocket League on the right-hand side. And these are things that I often do when I'm trying to differentiate work between types of students. So, effectively, you've got 4 or 5, 6 grades of different things, and you will set challenges for different abilities of students according to types of questions or the tasks that you're giving them. And I did find, actually, in the research that I was doing, that using symbols that are synonymous with games that they play, it doesn't matter which game it is, but make it something that they actually do play. So Fortnite was big a year or so ago, but it's not cool anymore apparently. Using those symbols to differentiate the work or the tasks or the questions is a really nice way to do it. And there's loads of other things you can do. It does very much depend on the class you've got and the kind of dynamics you've got. You might have the ability where you've got a student body who can play in teams or pairs, or you might be able to have a leaderboard with different people's scores that they've got over the time. There's lots and lots of things you can do with games and game-based learning to help students prepare for exams. And I think one of the things what we're trying to do with this, and associated with thinking about old concepts and going over old kind of topics, is that it can sometimes feel a little bit dry for students, and sometimes you need to bring it alive, certainly with some of the students that I have taught in the past. Now, I'm just going to have a very quick sip of water because, as you can probably tell, I talk quite fast, so excuse me. But the next thing I'm going to talk about is, very old school kind of concept, Waggles. So what a good one looks like, and something that I've been introduced to fairly recently from a colleague, which is called strategic reading. So Waggles and strategic reading, what essentially I'm getting at here is using great examples of essays in your revision or exam preparation. So this is fantastic for those longer essay or longer response questions. Often those things that students really try to shy away from doing if you ask them to do an essay. often it's a difficult thing to know really where to start. So what I try to do is produce my own great looking essay. So I'll write a bunch of essays on different topics, and it doesn't actually take you that long. You can actually do a decent sort of GCSE essay in 10 minutes, or an A-level one in 25 minutes. It might take you a wee bit longer if you're double checking all your sources and that. But the bad news with this is that you will need to actually write something to start off with. So you're going to need some resources to give out to students so they can see what a really good 20 out of 20 essay looks like at A-level, or a 15-mark essay looks like at GCSE, for instance. So that's the bad news. The good news is that once you get students to actually write essays and longer pieces of work throughout the year, you can actually build up a nice bank of what a good one looks like. I need to be very careful with how I phrase this. A good bank of waggles when you've got students who write decent essays. So every single time that I take in pieces of work from students, I absolutely, when I've graded them, I will always scan or photocopy, more likely scan because you can use them again, scan the best ones and keep them in your bank of waggles for your following year, or for your next year, your next time that you cover that particular topic. So the 100% the best thing that anyone ever told me about teaching, the best piece of advice, was basically steal good work. And if a student's done really good work, make a copy of it and use it as a model for future, because it's some way that I found to be really helpful with showing students exactly what that kind of A-star A-level essay looks like, or what that 9-grade essay looks like at GCSE. And it's not just a case of kind of handing these out and reading through these, but effectively what I do with this is I read from the front, I will read through the essay, but also get your students to actively engage with these good examples. So for example, getting students to highlight where they can see a point, explain, evidence, and link in each paragraph, or getting them to highlight where they think the assessment objectives have been hit. The other thing you can do with this as well is just to confuse them, to keep them on their toes, keep the jeopardy going a little bit, is to throw in a bit of a crap one now and again. So they'll be expecting you to give a good one every single time because you've done that for 4 or 5 times. Throw in a rubbish one now and again and tell them, right, what do you think of this? And they'll start looking at you as you read it out, looking really funny, and say, right, what I want to do with this one now is to improve it. And they really like that idea of being able to take something that should be good and isn't, but making it better. So that's a nice little technique you can perhaps take and use yourself. Now, just coming towards the end of this, and I'm quite conscious of time, but I think one of the other ways to really help students prepare for exams, to avoid this almost lethargy that comes through constantly getting up the textbooks or constantly doing something that involves writing in your book or writing something else, is just to mix things up. And so I often say to students, as a way almost to kind of get them on board with revision or with preparing for exams or whatever it might be, practicing their skills, is to ways we can do this without writing. So it won't come as any surprise that there's some wonderful podcasts out there that are sociologically based. Thinking Aloud, of course, from the BBC with Professor Laurie Taylor is fantastic. There's so many high quality episodes with some really good guests on as well. A good big shout out should also go to the Sociology Show, which is another really good podcast, an independent podcast as well. Get students to talk about something as well. So whether this is in a lesson or whether it's for homework, one of the things I often ask students to do, particularly if you're looking, this does work better slightly with GCSE students, if you're looking at a concept like the changing position of women, or perhaps how marriage has changed, or divorce has changed, or how education has changed, get them to speak to their older relatives if they're around, of course. So ask them, what was school like in your day, or how did men and women used to be treated? And I find that getting them to have a conversation with other people can be really, really effective for getting them to grasp concepts, particularly those changes in society over time periods. Something to read, of course, there's loads out there. Excuse me. Whether it's a case of getting them to go online and look at an article, or take something off Instagram or TikTok or wherever it is they've managed to find something, get them out of the textbook mentality. There's so much quality stuff out there. I'm sure most of us are on Twitter. Students seem to be a little bit kind of reticent to use Twitter, but do get them on there by heading them towards some of those excellent kind of sociology links, so SocFam or SocEdu or whatever they might be, SocRM for research methods, great resources on that, and there's always something new to read. And the final thing, obviously, is something to watch. So there are some fantastic YouTube channels out there. A level, I've got to give a big shout out to Kate Flatley, who is the teacher sociology. Her videos have been wonderfully helpful. Alexa Sugden, I think her name is Alex Sugden as well, is another one really good for A level. And then, of course, if you're kind of looking for something to do in terms of GCSE, there's always me. So that's some different pieces of kind of advice or guidance. I wouldn't call it wisdom because I'm not qualified enough to use wisdom, but some things that have worked for me over my teaching career so far that have helped students to revise for their exams. So just sort of going back over those bits and pieces, it was to start revision early, to use retrieval practice, to gamify where you can, particularly those retrieval practice exercises, to build up a bank of waggles and to do some strategic reading, which is effectively reading for a purpose, which is in the case of what we're talking about here, to how to best write a sociology essay. And of course, thinking about ways to mix it up there as well. So I have finished a little early, so I'm a little apologies if I have kind of undercut anyone here. I hope I haven't, and I hope that's been helpful, or at least given some people some ideas or some food for thought for how potentially they might help their prepare their students for this series of exams coming up in 2023. So thank you very much to everybody, Teach Me Icons, but particularly to Kerry and to Kim for setting this all up and inviting me to this. Please do stay in touch. All of my details are on there. Effectively, if you search All Sociology, all one word, on the internet, I will come up. So that's everything for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ben. There's definitely a couple of things in there. I'd never heard of System 1 thinking. That's got a few cogs going in my brain of something to think about. Retrieval practice is a massive thing in my school too, but I think I am a bit guilty of just doing very quick knowledge. So that's something that I'm definitely going to think about. I like the types of game as well, particularly for names of sociologists, because that's the thing that they always struggle with. My students do anyway. I do quite like writing an essay whilst I'm sat with them. With my A-level students, quite often we'll do it together. So, you know, I also like the sort of waggle kind of thing. And yeah, some really good podcasts. We need to shout out to Sunny's podcast as well, which is Sound Sociology.
That's awesome.
Yeah. We had the Sociology Show do the keynote for our in-person event. He did a video because of the train strikes, but that was really useful. And I've really enjoyed using that as well. So thank you very much, Ben. And I would say definitely go and have a look at Ben's GCSE videos. I do Educast as well, and I found them really, really useful, very sort of focused on the specification. I think the AQA specification is quite similar in terms of knowledge anyway, but I found that really useful. So we're going to move on now. I'm just going to check, Kim. Sorry. I've got the Pupil Progress sponsor. Is that next, Kim? Sorry.
Evening. I've had some technical issues, so this is why I'm recording this video. Thanks so much to the TM Icon Sociology team. I know they've been working incredibly hard. We've been sponsoring this now for 4 years, nearly 5, I think. I'll cut right to the chase. I just want to really emphasize we've got an incredible offer for all of our schools, that if you are a Pixel school, you are able to use our tracking. And what I'm actually going to show you is we've got the ability to track and monitor progress for any GCSEs, any A-levels, and it's exam board specific. So what we are doing essentially and very, very deliberately is taking away the stress from having to use your own Excel spreadsheets. Everything calculates the grade exactly as the exam board does. You're able to generate individual student reports and produce departmental analysis. It's really dramatically impacting on intervention, students being able to get really clear information as to what grade they're working at and why. I've just downloaded an instant report which gives a complete breakdown of how students are performing and gives me that insight that I need in order to support both my teachers and being able to communicate this with my students. If you go to pupilprogress.com, that's pupilprogress.com, you'll see that on the actual homepage, you can do one of two things. There's a pixel logo here that you can click on. That's going to take you through to the landing page to give you complete confidence and all the information you need to know that you do get 2 subject areas at 0 cost as part of your Pixel package. You can then click on register for your Pixel subscription. If I actually choose a school now that I know is a Pixel school, I will actually I'll actually be able to show you that it'll bring up your Pixel subscription, and I'll choose my 2 subject areas. Hopefully from this, one of them might be sociology and the other one might be maybe, who knows, English. And then you can actually move forward to the next stage, which is actually just simply registering. We're completely GDPR compliant, and we've got a really, really strong support team that can help with any questions and your setup. So please do visit pupilprogress.com. Thank you so much for your time this evening. And again, we really hope you enjoy the event. Speak soon. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
So yeah, I just want to say, the Pupil Premium have been a massive help to, Pupil Progress have been a massive help to Teach Me Icons generally, and have been kind of instrumental in supporting us, particularly with that, providing resources and support for our in-person events. So that's absolutely fab. Okay, so we're going to move on to the little Teach Meet section of this evening. So we've got a number of speakers talking about a whole range of different subject topics relevant to sociology. So we're going to start off with Laxmi Modi, who's going to be talking to us about whole class feedback at Key Stage 5, which I'm really eager to listen to, because this is something that I'm finding a bit of a struggle to make work. It's one of our whole school kind of initiatives, but I'm struggling to get it to work with my Key Stage 5. So over to you.
Hi everyone, so I'm really excited to join everyone this evening, and I hope everyone's had a great teaching day. With whole class feedback, I'm just going to go through one model of whole class feedback that I use in my classroom, and sort of how it can link to sociology. So firstly, if we think about some of the principles of whole class feedback, this is a massive area amongst loads of schools at the moment. So some of the benefits of whole class feedback, or sort of principles of whole class feedback, we can think about is it's about communicating key success factors to students and areas of improvement. So when we're looking at sociology in particular, we might think about key success factors being our AOs, so when they've shown evaluation, knowledge, etc., and then also sort of how they can improve. So that's sort of the what of what we're showing students to do. And then if we go on to the correct ways of doing, so we can think about exam questions, so how students should be answering these questions. And whole class feedback does enable us to identify whole class misconceptions, which is really useful when you've got common themes across the class, and you can really dig deep into those and consider how you can move a whole group forward in certain areas. So I'm just going to show you one model of whole class feedback, and this is a whole class. This is a model that I found on Twitter by Andy, and I just got his Twitter handle there. And whole class feedback is important in my context at the moment, because we're doing a lot around whole class feedback. Some of it links to, current issues around workload, and also how we can make students more responsible and independent for their learning, and not just when they're learning new concepts, but also when they're receiving feedback, because ultimately they are the ones that are going to have to write those exam questions at the end of the year. So it might be just important to think about what feedback looks like in your current context. In my current context, we were doing writing individual comments for all students. And this year we've taken more of a move to whole class feedback. So like I said, I'm going to talk through the model on the screen at the moment and sort of how I adapted it to sociology as it was being used for English. So firstly, I use this model for short answer questions in sociology. So as you can see on the left-hand side, I've got a picture of my students' work, and on the front, at the top row, I've got what excellence looked like. So we've got the pill structure for a 4-mark question. So that was the first row. So looking at what questions I needed to pick out, and then sort of what it would look like. And then as you go further down into the next row, we looked at sort of what would be the key steps to follow to reach that excellent model. And you can see on the right-hand side, when we're looking at the define question for proletariat, we looked at particular information that students would have to include. And then further, if we go down, a together task was about how could we make sure that students
Stevie.
Yes.
Sorry, can I interrupt you for a sec?
Yeah.
We can't see your screen. I think your screen share is YouTube, Kim has said.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
Oh, God.
Don't worry, it's fine. I'm going to mute myself again now.
Okay. Can we see it now? Is that okay?
I can see like the edit view of PowerPoint. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I don't know how to. Sorry.
No, you don't need to be sorry. It's fine. We all have technology errors from time to time. Kim says if you just go into slideshow, that should work.
Okay. Yes.
It might be just being slow, maybe. At the top.
Did it work?
No. But do you want to just talk us through it like that whilst we can? Oh, is it doing something?
Yeah, no. I can just talk through it. It's fine. I think.
Yeah. We can sort of see a bit better than before, so that's better. Thank you.
So from this, I got some student feedback because it's really important, I think, to have an open dialogue with students about feedback because I think sometimes we can think what we're doing is really, really beneficial when sometimes it can get disconnected. So from this, the students found it partly useful. As you can see, there was spaces to improve their knowledge. So there was continuity, but it didn't necessarily provide a helpful example. So if I just go on to, this was at looking at 20-mark essays for theory and methods and a Marxism usefulness essay. And this model is different because on the left-hand side, we focused on the structure of paragraphs, whereas on the right-hand side, we focused on content. So with whole class feedback, I think using this model, it's flexible to be able to look at both knowledge and skills. So when we went on to look at a different recent model, Andy had developed his model as well to focus on looking at targets. So on the left-hand side, you can see that we've still got the excellence is column, we've still got, and this looks like, but we've developed this further by looking at certain targets. So on the left-hand side, what went well, and then EBIs. And then as you can see in the students' work, we are able to annotate these. So again, this enables us to have common misconceptions. Then when we look at feedback, so you can see in figure 1, that is the targets that we set out. Then figure 2 is the students' work. So we still annotated and went through what excellence looks like. So we looked at the structure and then also the structure for a conclusion. And then being able to provide students with an example. And then on figure 3, really the outcome, where students were able to identify their targets, focus on their what went wells, and then from their targets, action those on their scripts. So it's this sort of model is the one that we're aiming for. And I think that this type of model can be adjusted for methods in context questions, theory of methods questions where they have to be more synoptic, and general topic questions. As you can see, I've done that for education. So as a self-reflection, as something that I tried out new, I wanted to reflect on it. So I think it equips students with more ownership of their learning. You can identify key class trends and have dedicated time to think about how this will be communicated with students. So really, when I look back at this model, I really had to focus on my 2 things that I wanted to really upskill students with. So for this, it was their peel paragraphs and the way they were structuring that, and then also their conclusions. And thinking really about what are these key elements that I am going to essentially address as misconceptions. And also allows us to have an opportunity to reteach in a structured manner. So really, it just flows from one section to the other, and that's really beneficial. So if we think about targets, so it does take time to adjust to a new method. We've only been doing this since September, and it can take some time out of lesson time. But again, if they are upskilled, their knowledge can follow. And I think one of the key things that I've really taken on is making sure that they understand the process and find it beneficial as well. So these are some of the student reflections I had. So the whole class feedback sheet, and this is the second one, helps us correlate to the mark scheme and look at key structure points for the essays. It looks at how paragraphs should be structured, provides examples for content, and also looking at structuring the essays in the essay formats. So that's sort of what we're doing for whole class feedback at the moment. I hope that everyone's found that beneficial. And yeah, so thank you.
Thank you very much. I picked out a couple of things here. So we have, we call them learning forward forms. And there's a couple, I feel like I want to play with it a little bit. So I like the idea of using excellence is ... I think that's quite useful. So that's something that I'm definitely going to implement. It was a little bit tricky to see some of your slides, but I know that they will be available on TES tomorrow. We've got our own little sort of account on there, so we'll be able to see that. So thank you very much for that. And yes, I think we're going to move on to our next speaker now. Before we do that, though, I would like to just highlight one of the YouTube comments from Kitsu, which says, "I think sociology teachers think more about their students than any other subject. Respect." Love that. Obviously, I am quite biased as a sociology teacher, but I think that's absolutely the case. So we're going to move on now to Kirsty Cook, who is going to be talking about retrieval practice and sociology, which is something that Ben mentioned earlier and is a big thing in my school too. Hi, Kirsty.
Hiya, is everything working okay? Can you hear me?
I can see your presentation. It's in the edit view though.
Is that better?
No.
Oh.
You're a little bit echoey as well. She says take off.
Okay.
Take off presenter view. Oh, it's doing something. No.
Is that working? It doesn't seem to. I can only seem to show it like that, or is this better like this?
If we can't get it to work any other way, that's better than not, I think. But yeah, the last thing Kim said was take off presenter view.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Am I okay to go?
Go for it.
Okay. Hi guys. So I'm sure we're all pretty well versed in retrieval practice and sociology anyway. But it's something that over the past year or so, couple of years, that we've been working on in my school, and in particular in my department. So just a bit of context, you know, I work at a school in Rotherham, been teaching sociology for about 10 years, head of department, and really focusing on, like I say, retrieval practice. So none of what I'm going to say, I don't think, is going to be anything new to anyone, hopefully, but we found massively at our school that retrieval practice has really improved. So just a couple of like books that I've used to kind of what I've been reading in terms of retrieval practice. I'm not, you know, sponsored by Amazon or have any affiliations with any of these authors, but if people are interested in retrieval practice and what we're looking at, these are books that I found really particularly interesting. And a lot of what I'm going to speak to you about this evening comes from these, and it's just things that I've just lifted from the books and used within my everyday practice. So why retrieval practice then? One of the big things I'm sure people have already alluded to is the fact that sociology, as we all know, is really content heavy at both GCSE and A level. You know, it's a 2-year course, doing things in year 12, having to come back to them in year 13, absolutely massive. So it really helps to keep current content and knowledge from previous years in their background, just ticking over. It's really helpful as a subject teacher to see where students' knowledge is and to see what we can do to maybe help close that gap between students. It can be done in both verbal format and written format. So quite often what I'll do is do maybe a retrieval practice and then do some cold calling and get students' feedback afterwards, to kind of see where their gaps in knowledge are and then see if we can like build on that. Quite often we will use low stakes practice as well. So I think that's really important, that low stakes is it's key to retrieval practice, because we want to see where the gaps are, but we don't want students to feel that they're kind of they're losing out, or kind of they're being judged and not having that knowledge. It's knowing where their gaps are and looking at, well, what can we do to kind of close that gap. Another reason why I think particularly important for sociology, helps make synoptic links. Again, I'm probably speaking to the converted here, but sociology is heavily synoptic, so it really helps us to kind of get students to draw on knowledge from other units or knowledge within the unit. One of the ways that we've been doing it as well is looking at it as a homework task, like particularly at GCSE and A level, 4 and 6 mark questions, kind of going back to content from year 12 when they're in year 13 and using it to show students where the gaps are, etc. So I did get a couple of quotes just in terms of why retrieval practice is important. So this quote I particularly like from Tom Sherrington: the more when we rehearse it, the more it is likely to stick in our brain, etc. And then like what it is, again from the Kate Jones book, which is really good, I really recommend that, is kind of the more it's there, the more it's retrieved, the stronger that knowledge is, and it changes the original memory. So in terms of how do I use it, so we typically use it at any point of the lesson, but quite often what we tend to do as a school, we have a do now policy, and we'll use it at the beginning as a way of kind of guiding the learning throughout the lesson, see where the gaps are. If there are gaps, we'll maybe come back to that, or maybe give individual support to students. Like I said, we'll use it both. Normally I start off with written format and then go into maybe verbal questioning as a result of that. And then we'll use that to kind of just guide the way through. And what also we've used this year quite often is use it as a homework task. So particularly with like year 13 students, looking at year 12 content and using that as a homework task for them. So these are just some examples that I've used over the past few years. I will absolutely credit Hectic Teacher. I know Kim's here this evening. For a lot of these ideas have definitely not come just from me, but the ones that I've used and I've found really, really interesting, and more importantly, students have absolutely loved. So, so for example, one of the ones that I've used, and again, this comes from a Kate Jones box, is retrieval grids. So we'll get students to come in, maybe on an A3 paper or on the whiteboard. They'll put this on the board, they'll sit there, and they'll just kind of answer as many questions as they can. And then we'll do a bit of cold calling, ask students feedback, and then that would make me think, okay, this is where gaps are, or this is what we need to maybe work on. And it just keeps that knowledge just ticking over for students. So quite often we'll do it, I know some staff do it in terms of what's like recent, last lesson, last term lessons. That's a really good way of doing it as well. I tend to do it as a bit of an easier, medium, harder level question. And that's worked quite effectively for us. Like my students particularly like that, and they're really, really used to doing that at the beginning of a lesson. We've then got what we use quite a lot, might be a bit of a brain dump, or old school terms, a bit of a mind map. So quite often on a whiteboard, we'll do a bit of a brain dump, or we'll do on A3 paper, get students just to literally just come in and just basically jot everything down, what they've learned in the last lesson or past series of lessons. And it just keeps them kind of their mind ticking over, and then we'll go back to that throughout the lesson, and we'll maybe add new knowledge onto that as well, so they can kind of go back to looking at the synoptic links that we spoke about earlier as well. So again, nothing out of the ordinary, but one that we've really utilised as a school. Another really good way of doing it, what we found, is by using exam questions. So like doing, year 12 questions, you use them in year 13 as a homework task. What I also like about this is a homework task, it's quite easy to get feedback from. Doesn't really take much. I would normally mark these, but it's not really that time consuming to mark as well. I'm sure fellow sociology teachers definitely have got a lot of marking on their plates, and it's just something that's quite an easy task, but also just keeps that knowledge at the forefront of our students' minds as well, that they've got to go back to year 12 content at the end of a 2-year course. So a revision clock is one that we really, really love. So again, it's one that I've kind of really just stolen from Kim. But again, maybe beginning of lesson, halfway, kind of maybe through a series of lessons, use this, get students to kind of put ideas on the sheet about internal, external factors, that is, and then it just keeps that kind of knowledge there for them. And it just, what students have said, and I put this in a couple of slides later, it just really helps them visualize it all in one place. It just keeps their knowledge, they know what they're doing, it's there, and it's just an easy way of them kind of seeing, and you seeing really easily as a class teacher where those gaps are. And I've just included a couple of examples from my students here of ones that they've done previously. So I'll just click through some of those slides, and then a couple more examples which I'll quickly just whiz through. We've got quizzes. It could be like a quiz that you write, a quiz that students write, 3 other students write, and then they kind of getting them to mark it, self-assess it, peer assess it. A really nice, easy way of getting it, kind of retrieving knowledge and seeing where the gaps are, for students to indicate themselves as well, where they might need to improve. Excuse me, apologies about that. Another last couple of ones we've got would be like knowledge organisers. Students really like these kind of a way, so they go all in one on piece of paper, seeing where the gaps are, seeing, kind of writing down what they know, and they can quickly see what they don't know as well, for you as class teacher. And then one thing that we've been working on quite a lot this year is this thinking and linking grid. So looking at where the links are between topics and getting students to kind of retrieve back and think, well, actually, we've looked at religious organisations for the beliefs unit, for example. How do they link to the actual social characteristics, and being able to explain the link between the two. So I did get a couple of students just to feed back to me before I did this about what they thought about retrieval practice, because I thought it's all well and good be saying, oh, retrieval practice is great in sociology, and actually it isn't. So these are just a couple of quotes from some of my year 13s and some of my year 12s. Good ways of identifying knowledge, clear image, keeps all areas of retrieval there. Particularly like for revision clocks, so got a lot of quotes back from students on revision clocks, saying it's helpful for consolidating, useful revision strategy. And that's kind of it about what students said, but hopefully what you can see there is that they actually are really beneficial. And just a couple of last things that I'd want to say is just they're really easy to use and they're beneficial, and also it's enjoyable both for you as a class teacher to use the strategy, and for students. Students are really, really positive. And of all aspects of my lessons, students will often say we like it when we can go back and we can see where we can go back to prior learning, because they want to see how all the topics link together. So generally we found it's really, really been key to success for students. And that's it from me. Thank you very much for inviting me to take part, and for listening. I'll hand back over to the team. I'll just unshare my screen.
Thank you, Kirsty. Some really good tips there. Retrieval grids are good. I've used those. I like the thinking and linking grid. Knowledge organisers, I would just like to say a massive thank you to Kim, because in my school that's our big one of our other big things. Our homework now is just that students have knowledge organisers, and then they do retrieval practice based on that. And the A-level ones, I have to say, I did steal the ones that Kim had written. She saved me hours and hours and hours of work, so I do have to say a massive thank you to her. So thank you very much, Kirsty. I think we're going to move on now to Cult of Sociology. Danica, hello. Hi. So you're going to talk to us about cognitive science and sociology.
Yes, I am. Can you see my screen?
I can. Yes, there's a picture of a Labrador.
Excellent. I seem to have lost it already. So, have I broken that? Are we okay? Oh, doesn't seem. There we go. Okay, so one of the things that I've been looking at was I was hired by my college to do a whole college project looking at metacognition and cognitive science. And I was really interested with the idea of when we learn new information and new concepts, essentially what we do is we shake the foundations of previous existing knowledge. So when students are learning about Marxism, they'll learn it in reference to the family and then in reference to crime, and how does that impact what they already know, so what they already understand. So I did this through schema theory. This is what my starting point was, to think, right, let's have a look at our mental templates. Let's have a look at that prior knowledge that we have in place and explore what happens as we learn, because I think a lot of students don't understand the learning process. They don't know why we teach them the way that they do, or why that they understand or learn the way that they do. So it's all starting off with that assimilation, that first step. These are our pre-existing mental templates, and often schema theory is known as we take in new information, we connect it to other things we know, believe, or have experienced. So as soon as we start that process of assimilation, this is when they're already starting to wonder, well, how does this impact this? How does this change this? And that leads to both equilibrium and disequilibrium, where essentially what we're doing, as I said before, we're shaking that foundation. They've gone from being quite concrete in their understanding to not. Now we have taking everything up like a snow globe and shaking it, and they don't know where they stand or how to turn that new learning into something that they can put in the right places and create the right paragraphs from. And the whole point of this is to get it to accommodation where they're comfortable with that information, where they don't feel overwhelmed, and where they can then turn that into new information and store it and adapt it. And the way that I looked at this was through Rosenshine and Stevens' principles. However, I was very reluctant with Rosenshine's principles because 17 principles is a lot. And as teachers, it's a lot to remember, and a lot of them we do anyway, and we have embedded into our teaching. So I decided to go right back to the original and the six that started it all, because in 2010, that's when Rosenshine and Stevens really started to explore cognitive science and observing other teachers. And I think that in itself shows that they were constantly developing, much like we do. So I decided the 6 principles were the best for me, and I decided to link them to schema theory to see how these could connect and how we could use these to support the students. So it's all about reviewing, which is our assimilation, presenting, which is about equilibrium, practicing, which is disequilibrium, our feedback, which is where we're starting to get that accommodation, and then all the way back to assimilation with our independent practice and our reviewing. And that is how we make the most concrete mental templates for the young people that we teach. And then I thought, right, so even 6 is quite complicated. So let's boil this down to 3. So plan, check, curate. And I thought this was really accessible for us. This made it seem much more accessible. And for me, I like working in 3s as is. So I thought this works quite nicely. So planning is all about what mental templates we're going to bring to the lesson. This is our stage. This is us thinking, right, what new theorists do they need to learn? What keywords? And then we go on to checking it. We go to check it before we begin. So this is the retrieval practice. This is double checking their previous learning. And then finally is the curating, which is where we actually teach the students. And that's when that disequilibrium and equilibrium will actually occur. So the thing is, it does sound a bit repetitive because often with retrieval practice it is, but much like has been said before, we start off every lesson in the second year with what's known as the mind purge. And the mind purge is a big whiteboard. I give them a topic and they have to write down everything they can remember about that topic. And they get little ticks per point, per concept, per theorist. And the group with the most ticks actually wins a treat out of a treat tin that we have. So it's a little bit of conditioning and bribery occurring as well. And this is just a better photo of it, because one thing I've learned is when you start to really know the students, you can recognize their handwriting. So you can see who is contributing the most. You can see who is the most confident in it. You can see who's falling short a little bit. And you can kind of work out, right, do I need to focus on this person? Do I need to put interventions in place? Do I need to make some more resources? And if they score low, this is when you need to not be afraid of that reteach. Sometimes I've scrapped a lesson to cover something that they haven't done very well in the mind purge. And this links to the phase 1 of Rosenshine's principles. From there, we go to the check stage. And we have our little grey books, as the students call them, and they are obsessed with them. We've recently come up with a new strategy for the winners, which is stickers. And I never realised just how much year 13s love stickers until I ended up finding myself spending £10 on Amazon on stickers. So these are the brain workouts, and this is linking to the 6th principle, and that's assimilation, with the reviewing weekly and monthly. So this is on the spot. 10 questions. As soon as they do it, they mark it, and that goes straight into the mark book as a tracking process. So I have my own little notebook that I keep in front of me, and then this is an example of a student's work. And as you can see, they use a different colour to mark it, and they write in the correct answers. And then this is when they'll turn these into Quizlets, or what they call flashcards. So As you can see, the students gone from 5 out of 10, 5 out of 10 to 6 out of 10, and then finally to that 9 out of 10. So we're really starting to see that confidence building up. We're starting to see them do even better in those little brain workouts. And this is the same with this student. The only difference between this and the previous is this one has included dates. So when we revisit them and we ask the same questions but in a different order, they can compare it against what they got previously. So the final stage is the curate stage, which is essentially the teaching stage. And I use cognitive load theory for this. And this isn't rewriting the wheel. This is simply using something that we do consciously and unconsciously all the time, and we don't realize it. And that is the I do, we do, you do. So it brings in modeling, it brings in scaffolding, it chunks up that information. It means that the equilibrium, disequilibrium isn't too overwhelming. We can check as we go through. You get something to mark should you want to. It's got collaboration. Essentially, I'll model it, then we'll do it as a class, and then finally they'll do it independently. So it's, again, building that independent learning as well. A good example of the I do, we do, you do is the way that I teach brand new information. So I'm just checking to see if my slides are moving on. There we go. And what we do is we use mini whiteboards for this, and I don't put any new information onto the board until they've told me the previous information. And the reason I do this is I want to make sure that previous learning, that review sage, those mental templates are firmly in place before I go up and shake them about with brand new learning. And so we have little whiteboards. Every student has to hold one up. When we've got a consensus, it will then go on the board for students. And this is that review and that presenting. It's how I find is a way of revising as I'm teaching new material, so then it doesn't feel too overwhelming for them. And then for independent practice, my main way of doing this is through homework, because I feel like homework can be a fantastic tool, or it can be a waste of time for the young people. And we have to set 4.5 hours a week. So I wanted to make sure the homework that I set was meaningful. So the first thing is to create revision resources. And then it's to watch videos and read articles. And as you can see, there's the fantastic Revised Sociology and Tutor to You there for the students. Then they plan an exam question response. That is the only thing I'll mark, is that response. So therefore, it's keeping my workload manageable as well. So that's the first years. And then for the second years, we use the Tutor to You exam skills booklets, and they have to do a page of those per night. And then they do a full answer to a question, and this has its own sheet with it, and we do boost tasks, and then we have embedded dirt time at the end of every lesson. And this is where that feedback from Rosenshine and Stephen's principles come in. So as I said, it's nothing new, it's nothing overly exciting, but I find having these structures in place, having these set routines has really made a difference for the students, and I'm seeing an increase in confidence with them. So I guess the key takeaways from what I'm saying is to emphasize the difference between revision resources and revision practice. If they're not doing anything with it, then that's not useful. That's not helpful. To break down learning and ensure instructions are clear, prevent cognitive overload with the I do, we do, you do. Questioning is one of the most easiest ways of getting any form of retrieval practice. The big whiteboards, the little whiteboards, on the spot, the whole shebang. And then finally, recognizing the links between what they are learning and what they've already known, as we said at the beginning with those synoptic links. So that's it from me. I'll stop sharing my screen. Oh,
that was fab. I could feel myself doing lots of nodding when you were talking. There's a lot sort of, we're doing walkthroughs in our school, and there's definite links to what you were talking about. I teach a bit of health and social care as well. And I was like, schemas, accommodation, Piaget, perhaps. That was sort of bringing some bells for me. So thank you very much for that. Really useful and nice links to sort of some cognitive science and teaching of sociology. So we're going to go over to a video from our sponsor now, from Teachers Love Stationery Club. They were at the live event, if any of you were there. I don't know if any of you got to take home a little pack. I took home one. I've got my I Love Sociology badge on my lanyard at work, which I very proudly show off, that came from them. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to move on to our next Teach Meet speaker now, which is Nada Al-Sudani, who is talking to us about sharing practice in theory and methods, which I know is one of the trickiest subjects to cover at A level in AQA. So over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Can you see the slides yet?
No. Oh, yes, yeah.
Excellent, great, okay. So just a little bit of background on myself. So I've recently started, in September at a college. And before that, I was a head of department in a secondary school. So my practice has slightly changed, but I've tried to be very consistent with some of the practices I use for theories and methods, which I found to be quite useful sometimes. So my kind of top 5 things that I use and I've consistently been using from secondary to college is setting the scene, recall maps, which was mentioned earlier already, explain the memes, applying your understanding, and then finally finish the essay. So setting the scene is what I try and do to kind of give the basis or the background of a theory. So, for example, if it is about functionalism and how they view society, I would perhaps start with the human body and say, ask us a question, how could this be similar to society? And then hopefully students will just tell me, the institutions are like the organs, they all work together for a healthy body and then a healthy society. And then I introduce them to functionalism and I say, that's great. That's exactly what Parsons was thinking. So just setting that scene for them. So this one's quite straightforward and quite easy for students to understand. When moving on to social action theories and the interpretivist approach, I found that students sometimes didn't really understand what I mean by meanings attached to interactions and how they shape our interactions. So to set the scene, I use this example of a baby crying and ask everyone, would you see it's a baby crying? Why might the baby be crying? And everyone would give different reasons. And based on their different reasons, that would then shape their interaction. So their meaning shapes their interaction, and they kind of understand that once they've actually practiced it themselves. So they see the baby, and one person will say it needs its diaper change. So that then shapes their interaction with the baby. The next method, another setting the scene. So for social policies, explaining social problems and sociological problems and how social problems then shape social policies. So this topic, I think sometimes students are a bit disheartened with, or they're just not very excited with social policies. So I give them the policy and I just ask them, what is it trying to do? What problem is it trying to solve? And then once they've realized, what the problem is to solve, they'd understand that that's a social problem, not a sociological problem, or what the difference between the two is and who argued this. The next one is the recall maps, which was mentioned earlier as well. This I can't take credit for myself. I just found it on Twitter. But I really like the way it's colored and it's color coordinated. So I do remember seeing it with points. So the first like box where I've got postmodernism / late modernity, that would be 1 point. The second would be 2 points, 3 points, and 4. So making it harder. What I like to do is just keep them on different topics and then have one column that's perhaps random. So this, I think I gave to my students just after we've done postmodernism. So some of it would be the lesson before, some of it would be from the start, and the random is literally what question I think they're not too good with. I prefer to use this as a do now. I've noticed that with a lot of my college students, because we don't really hand out or give homework as much as we did in secondary schools, this is kind of their real time to recap on stuff for us anyways. And some students, you know, lack the confidence sometimes, especially with so many key thinkers and so many key concepts in sociology, that even getting a couple of these right, they kind of like have that boost of confidence and they kind of start the lesson in the right way. So they understand the thought changes associated with globalization, and it's a little win for them to start off the rest of the lesson on a good note. So this is one example for theories and methods. This is another example that I've used for them to recap on AS content. So of course you can give this to year 12 students as well, but I've given this to year 13 so for them to recap on AS content. This one I've left the points in, but that one's of course very optional. The next approach is explaining the memes, which was really for my own kind of entertainment. But I quite like it where students understand memes, they understand, you know, the different meanings behind them and the different poses and the different faces they see with these memes, so they know what they're supposed to argue. And I quite like that these are sociological, so they simply have to explain what it is. So the second one, sorry, let's get qualitative. You know, I'm hoping they're going to say qualitative data, information presented in in words and literacy, could be images, Verstehen, Weber, all of those things. And it's kind of like a nice way to start. And there's so many things they can say about one meme that I'm hoping that at least everyone can say one thing. Even your very weaker students, they could at least identify one or two concepts, and that would just start them off in a good way. The next one is applying your understanding, which isn't very revolutionary, but this is simply to make sure students understand that when they are doing theories and methods, they can include examples from different topics, which I've noticed that my students sometimes completely forget that theories and methods is so broad, and you can include examples, and it's a synoptic unit, so you can use whatever concepts or whatever units you can think of. Also with theories and methods, what I've noticed is that students can understand sometimes Marxism in education, but not Marxism at its core. So if they have an article like this, for example, you know, and they have to put their Marxism cap on, what would he say? What would Functionist say? And what would the dramaturgical approach be? So they're kind of understanding how to argue everything from each perspective, but also counter argue with alternative theories. So this article was about workers being underpaid. Then I did something similar to when I was teaching social policies. So I gave them this policy, and they have to argue from the feminist perspective and new right perspective, drawing information from there, using that to kind of solidify their understanding. And then my last one is finish the essay. And this one was very much for the methods questions. So I felt as if students were quite confident with, you know, lab experiments and strengths and limitations of them. But when it came down to actually structuring a solid 10 marker for these kind of questions, they were really, their answers were very surface level. So where I can, I try and make model paragraphs. It also kind of helps me to model and ensure that I have the right subject knowledge for these kind of questions and I can use the marks correctly. These can obviously be color coordinated to AO1, 2, and 3 marks as well. But I think it helps students to kind of give them a bit of a starting point. It helps to model for students who are on the lower end as well, but also for the higher achievers, just so they can be reminded of, you know, what really goes into a 10 marker without an item, or for theories and methods, and how that's slightly different to other units. But yes, those were my 5 methods.
Thank you very much. I like the memes idea. I've got loads of them up on the back wall of my classroom, and I just leave them there. I don't really do anything with them, but I quite like that as a sort of little retrieval practice, do now activity, maybe write on the tables around them. I've got my cogs turning, which is always good. Thank you very much for coming and talking to us about theory and methods.
Thank you for having me.
No worries. We're going to move on swiftly now to Charlotte Hackett. Hello, Charlotte. You are talking to us about systems and structures for success in sociology.
I am indeed, yes. Hi everyone, I'm Charlotte. Thank you for spending your Tuesday evenings with all of us. I want to talk today about systems and structures for success in A-level sociology. I apologise in advance if my Wi-Fi connection is a bit patchy. I can't decide whether it is or not. The first thing that I want to kind of explain to you is why these systems are really important for me as a teacher. I'm in my second year of my ECT. I originally trained in English, but my degree is in sociology. So I'm trying to make sure that I can take the best bits of my English teaching and the best bits of my subject knowledge from my degree to turn into something that's useful and palatable for A-level students. It's my first year full-time as a sociology teacher, and I am a one-man band, as it were. So it's really important for me that everything I need is set out and ready and organised, because if it's not, my head will fall off. As well as that, I really hope and feel that the structures that I've developed give everybody the same base level of knowledge, particularly for lower prior attainers or people who feel like they've not quite developed the skills needed to make successful notes yet. It's also potentially good for cover work, not a problem I've come across yet, but it might be really successful for cover work, no need to create one-off lessons, and so on and so forth. Building of knowledge and skills can happen at the same time. And it also means that people don't go home with work that needs to be marked. I've got what I need, they've got what they need. So my structures come in 3 parts. This probably comes with a bit of a health warning in that for some people, these will be things that they do all the time. It's not brand new, but I think it works really well for me. So each pupil has got 3 books. They're all school style exercise books. And I think for me, that's the most important part about it. It doesn't rely on people kind of filing their own notes and trying to keep organised, because that's not a skill that everybody has. So everyone has a green knowledge check book, a pink content book or notebook, and a blue exam practice book. And each of these books is for a very specific thing. I then colour code booklets and PowerPoints to go along with that, so nobody has to ask me what colour book they need and at what time. So every lesson, in terms of systems and structures, every single lesson starts with a quick knowledge check in their green book. These are 5 quick questions that are self-marked. None of it is new content, and hinge assessments will also go in this book. So just as kind of a quick view of what one of these slides might look like, pupils will come in, they've got their learning challenge, date, title, topic, and unit on the board. And most of these will be one-word answers. Some of them will require a little bit more detail, but this tends to be just a really quick setting in task, like most of us will use all the time. Then really quickly, we always mark in purple pen, so it then turns purple. But again, like the colour coding is really important to it, because it means that people don't have questions. Moving on to that then, we've got content books. So they will either use a pink content book. Some of them have got their own notebooks. I'm not too staunch about the pink content books, because this is more about their own note-taking. But alongside that, they have got knowledge booklets, which are similar, I'm sure, to the booklets that most of you will use day in, day out. So a very standard base level of knowledge for everybody to build upon, with keywords lists and theorists for quick reference too. So again, just a really quick insight into the inside of these booklets. Again, new theory always comes up in pink so that they can find it really quickly. Tasks are specifically linked to assessment objectives, so they know what each of them look like. Really base level of knowledge. It's not vastly detailed, but again, it allows them to go away, do the extra learning, and make sure they've got that depth of knowledge. Might find some longer form questions, writing paragraphs outlining views, like theoretical viewpoints, for example. And then at the end of every single booklet, they need to fill in a keyword sheet for the unit that they've just done, which I find, because they can do that in the lessons, is a good alternative sometimes to asking for flashcards or things like that. In terms of what the actual lesson and PowerPoint looks like, it's all the same content, but placed into a slide form. Again, so nobody has to wonder whereabouts in the booklet we are or what on earth I'm talking about. With each of the tasks as well might come some purple penning, might come some answers to questions, for example, and as well kind of school regulated literacy strategies and things like that come along the side. Again, that will be different for everyone, but I find that this is really, really, really good for structuring what should be happening with each of the tasks. Is it something that they're talking about? Is it something that they're just writing? Is it something that they're just thinking about, for example? Just really quick signposting. There are also things within the PowerPoints that I don't feel are paramount enough to be placed into the booklet. So bits linked to the super curriculum. Here's part of Benefit Street. Maybe you want to go away and watch this in your own time, but not something that they would need to watch to revise from, for example. Then we might have a bit of discussion around that. They might make some notes in the booklet, but that is down to them. So this is all all about really the base building of that knowledge that everyone can then go away and take the same thing away from as a bare minimum. Finally, then, within these booklets, there will be sheets like this. So again, they see the blue, they know they're now working in their blue book. Blue is for exam practice. So they have a specific book just for essay writing, essay skills, and kind of recording of their grades. Quite often I will produce a Peel planning sheet like this that also goes into that blue book. So I can use that planning sheet to see, okay, if something's gone wrong, has it gone wrong in the planning? Has it gone wrong in the writing? Is it the knowledge or is it the structure where we've maybe had some teething problems? Again, it's just really good to be able to signpost them to specific parts of booklets or which book they should be using without having to be really didactic and be like, now everybody has to, and trying to kind of guide their independence without telling them exactly what they should be doing. So again, within the lesson, the blue box will come up on the screen. It's no longer pink or green, it's blue. So they know immediately, they see blue, they groan because they know we're doing an essay question. In this specific lesson, we did the planning sheet together as a group, or we did each task bit by bit by bit as a group, looking first of all at reading and highlighting hooks, choosing hooks and identifying points for them, for example, then completing the planning sheet and writing the answer. Essentially, that is everything that I've got to share with you. I might have been a little bit quicker than I needed to be, but I'm really, really, really conscious of teaching people how to suck eggs, and I really don't want to do that. I just wanted to share with you what is really successful for me, and I feel like really helps my workload, and it's something that maybe doesn't come at the forefront when we're planning, but I feel like this is really good in terms of my workload, because once all the booklets are finished, they'll maybe need altering once a year, and the PowerPoints along with that. If you've got any questions, or if you want any resources that I might have made, whether or not I've actually made them yet is a whole other story, but please feel free to drop me an email or a tweet and I will do my best to help. But thank you for listening to me, and I hope I haven't cut out a million times.
No. And enough of this teaching grandmother to suck eggs. You know, some of us are teaching a long time. I've been teaching 15 years or something crazy, but sometimes it's nice to have reminders, and that's what I felt like tonight, is that things that I might have done before COVID that I've just forgotten about. I like the use of the exercise book as a knowledge book. I have an exercise book that my students have just for exam questions. That works really, really well for me, but I quite like the idea of the one for the knowledge as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to move on now to Nicole Ridley, who is going to talk to us about developing cross-curriculum links between PSHE and sociology. Unfortunately, her camera's not working, but we should be able to get her presentation and her audio.
Perfect, thank you. Is my audio working okay?
And I can see your presentation, so that's fab.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Sorry, I just thought I'd check before I talk to myself. Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me. I'm sorry my camera's not working, but technology just wasn't playing ball today. So I'm Nicole Ridley. I'm a teacher in Hull. My role technically is subject lead for PSHE, but I'm a history specialist by training, and I also started teaching sociology when it came into the school. It's quite new for us. And as I'm going to talk about, we are looking at cross-curricular links with PSHE and sociology to try and support the building of schema, as has already been mentioned tonight. And I think really just students' confidence in sociology, because they are seeming to struggle a little bit when they first get into the course. So the target areas for us, you can see in blue as a sociology department, is that we've identified that when our students come into year 10, because this is GCSE, they're getting very overwhelmed by the language, the structure of the questions, the way that the questions are worded, the content that they're expected to deal with, having had no prior knowledge of the subject, is overwhelming for them as well. The scale of the evidence base, in terms of there's so much data and there's so many examples to draw on, overwhelms them. Our students particularly struggle with a lack of cultural capital, and I think a lot of the things that we talk about in the education section is very pertinent to our particular demographic. They don't have much of a schematic framework when it comes to the way that the world works, the way that institutions work, even the sheer amount of institutions that we have in the country. And that lack of knowledge leads to a lack of empathy. Now, I should have said at the beginning that the context of this talk is primarily for us having absolutely no sociology in Key Stage 3. We've just not really had the time because we've only just started teaching it, but we also don't have the space in the curriculum at the moment. So students come to Key Stage 4 having never looked at any sociology, and so they hit it, and it just overwhelms them, basically. So we are looking at using sociology to support, using PSHE, to support that. And I know that some schools do have sociology at Key Stage 3, but cross-curricular links are always kind of good practice anyway, so I hope that this will still be useful. For context around that, our target areas as a school is to connect our programme of personal development across the school with all subjects and all disciplines, and make that relationship reciprocal. So we have a lot of personal development in maths and in history and in geography, but we're really careful, and we really want to make sure that PSHE, that's what we call it, PSHE, isn't put above any one of those subjects. Sociology is not less important than PSHE. PSHE isn't more important than any other subject. We want to be able to reinforce each other, and so that's what we're trying to do by creating cross-curricular links. So, because my friend and I are slightly nerdy and obsessed with Harry Potter, we kind of figured this out in the form of the Deathly Hallows, which just kind of started because we were drawing lines, but then it looked like the Deathly Hallows, so we just kind of ran with it. And she's called Miss Vic History. You can find her on Twitter. But this is how we kind of framed it in our heads, that all of the links between the different subjects should be reciprocal. They should be subtle, in that if you're in sociology, you're studying sociology. If you're in PSHE, you're studying PSHE. But at the same time, those subjects are supporting each other by reinforcing messages or using the same language or going over different skills, so that it is genuinely reciprocal. It's not just kind of gimmicky or tokenistic, or you do this theme in English, so we're going to talk about it here. They are a natural part of the subject. So in PSHE, I think it can support sociology in a variety of ways. First of all, it's the culture of the classroom itself. In PSHE, we really make an effort to have it be a safe space where people can discuss. We can tackle social issues. We can talk about really contentious issues. And I think PSHE staff are well trained, as hopefully most staff are, but particularly in subjects where you do tackle sensitive issues, they're trained to navigate discussion. And if an opinion comes up that might be contentious, I think staff are quite good at redirecting it or challenging it maybe, and saying, why do you think that? Where have you got that opinion from? Have you considered this? And I think they're quite good at teaching students how to debate. And in that sense, once they reach the end of Key Stage 3 and they go into Key Stage 4, then they have those skills ready to tackle the questions and the debates in sociology, and they can kind of step up a notch rather than coming at it completely new. But the biggest area of crossover with sociology is absolutely the cross-curricular links. So in this table, I've just kind of jotted out some of the areas where it can cross over. And in the content column, I've kind of color-coded it into, you've got general methods and areas of crossover in the black, family, education, crime, and then social strats. And it's essentially the entire P-Sheet curriculum is a foundation for GCSE or I imagine A-level sociology. We don't teach it, but you can look at family structures, you can look at reasons for achievement, discrimination, you could look at poverty and homelessness, you can look at interactions, you can look at organizations. I think it's a really good way of scaffolding the language and scaffolding the concepts. So when we are teaching P-Sheet, we try and, or we're starting to try and use the same language. So if it's, say, labeling, for example, we'll use that and we'll draw attention to that concept as a sociological concept and start getting them to use the same language, the same conversation that they would have in the GCSE further down the school, so that when they get there, that conversation and the language and the debate is much more familiar. I think as well, the skills. So I have a bit of a bee in my bonnet about skills in P-Sheet, to be honest, because I think most people think there isn't any, and I don't think that's strictly true. P-Sheet is incredibly knowledge-based, but it's also about action, and it's about empathy and all of those skills you need in order to access a variety of GCSE subjects. History is the same. So I think in terms of a skills base in P-Sheet, we can set up particularly analysis of data. Our students get very overwhelmed by the graphs and all of the tables and the statistics, but through the P-Sheet curriculum, we can drip feed data analysis and the ability to take apart data sets by looking at local statistics and things like that. You can do a lot of work on evaluation and analysis, a lot of work on argument and structured debate. There's a lot of opportunity for challenge, for extended writing, for keywords, for concepts, abstract concepts. So I think the areas for crossover is absolutely huge. But in summary, the areas when we really try to focus on is familiarity with keywords, establishing solid schematic frameworks through the content, and developing students' understanding of the world around them, so that by the time they get to Key Stage 4, all of these topics aren't completely overwhelming. So thank you very much for listening, and that's everything.
Thank you very much, Nicole. I absolutely agree that the crossover is massive. My PGCE a million years ago was social sciences with citizenship. I did a whole term just teaching PSHE, so I can definitely see the links. And one of the things my school has just done is introduce PSHE as a discrete subject, which I think is fantastic, which we haven't had before. And so that's not something I've ever really thought about, sort of embedding those ideas at Key Stage 3. So again, I think that's been really helpful and made me think. Okay, so we're going to move on to our final topic. So we've got Richard Driscoll, who has got a video for us about sociology beyond the curriculum. So Kim's going to put that on for me, please.
Cool. And thanks so much to TM Icon Sociology for giving me the opportunity this evening to share some ideas about how you can go beyond the curriculum in sociology. It's a shame I can't be delivering this live, but the 8-hour time difference is a bit tricky. What I'm going to be doing today is I'm going to be sharing strategies that have worked both in my experience of teaching in China, as well as when I taught previously in Blenheim High School in Epsom, which was where I was for 7 years. Some of the strategies that I'm going to share is one, to join the British Sociological Association. They've got the annual Young Sociologist of the Year competition, which is a great opportunity for your students to engage with, particularly students who are thinking about studying sociology or related subjects at university. I'm also going to share some of the other opportunities available if you belong to the BSA. Secondly, I'm going to look at some student podcasts that you can carry out with your students. That could either be for the sociology show, or it could be for carrying out assessments internally in class. Also going to look at the idea of student research projects. That's something that I used at the start of my career when coursework was removed from the spec. Also the idea about making links with universities, how you can go about that and the advantages that can also enable your students. And finally, university style reading sessions. You can do this either in lessons or it could be an extracurricular activity. So first of all, I really recommend you joining the BSA. This Young Sociologist competition really can develop students' interests beyond the curriculum. Each year there's a different theme and students can attempt this competition through different ways. Most students tend to go for the essay format, but they can also produce a podcast or even produce a film. I've got, when I moved to China, then I got in touch with the BSA because originally this was more for students in the UK, but they opened it up to international students as well. And it was amazing that Carrie, who'd only been studying sociology at that time for 3 months, actually won the competition. And it really inspired her to go beyond and to study related subjects of sociology at university in the US. Her essay was on the globalization of education. And following her success, she was also interviewed by local journalists. And I mean, what she said there, she wanted to explore her interests instead of just sitting exams. And if you have a look at the BSA website, you can see the previous competitions that they've had. I also would recommend that your students who enter, that you would then produce a booklet which you can either produce in lessons or taster sessions or in the library. And that can really inspire future generations of students at your school. And as I mentioned earlier, you could also, some students will want to look at creating a documentary. We had a student called Rindy who's created a documentary which you can find on YouTube, which got special commendation that year. And she said that the experience opened her eyes, made her think about her future major in college, and then jokingly said, well, Miss Driscoll said I'd write something nice. So, I mean, on the serious side, it is really useful for the university office and the University Council Office that I can make recommendations about how students have gone beyond the curriculum. And those skills are really useful if they want to study either in the UK or in the US. So strategy 1, also alongside the Young Sociologist competition, if you're a member, you'll also have access to the conferences which BSA run, as well as resources from the study groups, journal articles, etc. They've got a good section for student resources. And last year, with the BSA conference taking part remotely, I looked at some of the relevant sessions and we watched it along together, and we paused to have reflections on some of the themes. What was really nice was 2 of the students involved, they really found research about homeschooling in Hong Kong particularly interesting, and they wrote up an article which was then published in the Network magazine for the British Sociological Association, which was really nice. So strategy 2, this is a strategy which I've adopted more recently. I try and encourage students to listen to the Thinking Aloud podcasts. Particularly, they often have research in which might be relevant to their own experience. So there's a really interesting one on the Chongqing mansions. It's an ethnographic study in Hong Kong. And this was a sociologist who every week spends a couple of days living in different hotel rooms to find out about the communities. There's also been research on like the middle classes in China. So within a class, you can encourage students to sort of take on the format of like a Thinking Aloud podcast where they'd be interviewing a sociologist and then maybe even sending a tweet to the sociologist. So we did that with one which was looking at some research by Tariq Madood. It's really quite an engaging task and one I recommend strongly. And for some of your students, they could go even further and they can create a podcast if they like for the sociology show. So, I mean, I will say at this point, just a big thank you to Matthew Wilkin, who put so much effort into creating fantastic podcasts for that. Really a great way of students going beyond the curriculum. And secondly, you can see there from the website, this is an article from Shortcuts TV blog, which is by Chris Livesey. And when I started off my teaching career, there's some amazing resources there on Sociology Central. So really appreciate the fact that the sociology community is so supportive, and we have so many great supports out there. So that's something you could look at. If you're interested, you can have a look at the podcast that my students carried out, which was looking at the gig economy in China. And I asked Annie to provide a quote for this, and this was some of the skills that she's gained from being involved with the sociology show. And have the students choose a research topic, and then they write a proposal with a research method, a very brief literature review, and then they go out and carry out the research. And this is a great way for them to really share their passion with the other students in the class. And again, I've approached Chris Livesey, and he's posted some of the research on his blog, and the students get very excited when that happens. So I think the strategy of students carrying out research projects is really effective for going beyond the curriculum. Strategy 3 is looking at student research projects. So I really recommend that this is a great way for students to go beyond the curriculum. I can show on the Twitter, I can post, if you like, the parameter for how this course can be set up. But essentially, you can. Strategy 4 is making links with universities. So what I've done here is I've managed to keep in touch with John Hudson, who was my mentor when I was at York University. And we've had 2 really fantastic lectures where they've sent representatives come over to Shenzhen. One was about are we becoming more unequal? And also John delivered one on his work he'd done with the UNICEF Child Wellbeing Report. So I really recommend if you can make connections with university. And now it's a bit easier because we don't have to have face-to-face talks. It can be a virtual visit. And my final strategy I'm going to share tonight is about university-style reading sessions. I think this is a fantastic way that you can extend the students and go beyond the curriculum. So I'll choose a book which I'm interested in myself and I know really well. So for example, last year we looked at Diane Rear's work on miseducation, set up chapters to the students to read in advance. Then I have questions which we ask in a lesson, and I've got a sample question there which linked into work by Owen Jones. And I find having this university style reading session really does help to extend the students' interest and has worked really well. And Maggie, who's currently studying sociology at LSE, has written about some of the benefits here. She went on and then took the work of Diane Rear to then, in a student club, she taught younger years and she sort of mirrored the session that we'd done with myself. So that is a real whistle-stop tour, really, of some strategies that I think are really good to go beyond the curriculum. I only had a short time to do this presentation, so I'm going to share some ideas over the next few weeks on Twitter. I hope you found some of those interesting, and I hope you really enjoyed the session tonight. Thanks very much.
So I know he's not here because of the time difference, but we'd like to say thank you to Richard for recording that for us. Some very interesting points. And Sunny has made a comment about the BSA photography competition that some of his students entered last year. I think that sounds quite interesting. I've got a couple of students that are sort of into that kind of thing, so I might investigate that as well. So I'm going to finish off, round up the evening. Thank you to those of you who've been watching. Thank you to all of our speakers for giving up their time. Thank you to Kim for doing the tech, and thank you to Sunny for doing the Twitter feed. I'd also like to remind everyone that this is available on YouTube at a later date, and that resources, PowerPoint presentations will be available on the TES tomorrow. We have got a couple of things coming up this year. So I mentioned this earlier, we've got a live event booked on the 25th of March, so a bit earlier than last year. There are more details to follow, but we've decided to do things a little bit differently. And this is going to link to Nicole's talk earlier about cross-curricular links. So we've got a cross-curricular panel planned. So we're going to discuss some of the links between sociology and some other subjects, including English, RS, I think, as well. A few others that are in the pipeline, but we haven't quite sorted yet. We've also got a further virtual event in the summer. As it said in the little ribbon below, anyone who wants to get in touch, anyone who wants to be involved, who wants to be a speaker, please get in touch, preferably via Twitter. You can send us a DM at TM Sociology Icons. And I think that is about it from us for tonight. Have a good evening, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you.